And when they pour the desperation on, when they pour the lawfare on, the way they're doing in Colorado, they're not doing it to Donald Trump, they're doing it to test you. When they whoop a man's ass out there in the streets, when the police whoop a man's ass out there in the streets, it ain't, yeah, that man's taking an ass whooping. It ain't gonna feel good. It's gonna hurt. It's a problem for him, no doubt. He's having a bad day. But the greater impact is on you, all of you who watched, all of you who stood there and came up with an excuse why you should just stand there. That's who it's really meant for. That's how psychological dominance works. And we all know this. We all know that's how it works. That ain't new. That ain't nothing new. Psychological dominance works by setting an example, making an example out of. This was the Willie Lynch address. Oh, you have your pro-black scholars, intellectuals, academics come out of left field now and say, the Willie Lynch address is not real. Okay. Well, let's just say, theoretically speaking, what was conveyed in the Willie Lynch address is the nature of psychological oppression or psychological Stockholm syndrome in some cases. A deep psychological Stockholm syndrome. It says in the Willie Lynch address that they would take the biggest, strongest black man they could find, and they would beat him within an inch of his life. And then they would tie his body to two horses, and they would send the horses in opposite directions until it would literally pull the man's body apart. And they would do this in front of all the other slaves. And they would and while they did it in front of the other slaves, they were really doing it for the woman. That was the intended, the target audience. Yeah, we're going to let all the slaves see it, but it's really intended for her. And the reason why is because she was the sole source of spiritual and emotional intelligence amongst the community of slaves. And through her nature, she was able to wield a lot of power, a lot of influence over the men. And in that influence, as spelled out in the Willie Lynch address, she became the greatest guard dog for the slave master. Her being the guard dog for the slave master didn't work in the way where she actually stood guard against revolt. No, it didn't work in that way. It wasn't her standing at the door ready to sound the alarm with her voice if ever other slaves were going to rise up and try and overthrow their bond, their chains and bonds of their captors. It wasn't that. It was in the way that she raised the children. She would raise her children in reverse roles. This was spelled out in the Willie Lynch address. If you've never read it, you need to go read it tonight. And take the race part out of it. I mean, I know the race thing is, it kind of confounds people. Take the race out of it. Understand that what was done to certain groups of people, many groups of people, not just blacks, but many groups of people all throughout history has now reached an accumulative point where they're going to apply what they've tested on multiple groups of people throughout history. And so you can see what was done to black people through slavery or other time periods in history or other groups of people in history now was a pilot of what they're going to try and do to all of us. And that may be the most important thing to talk about when talking about race, in the history of race in this country, around the world, is what was done to us is now going to be done to all. That's where we are in this country. That's where we are in this moment in history. The oppressive things that were done to some are now going to be tried on all. And in this case with the Willie Lynch address, what it said is they would take the biggest, strongest Negro and they would beat him within an inch of his life. And they would tie his body to two horses and they would send the horses in opposite directions until it pulled that man's body apart. And it would leave the woman's image of the man, the black slave, the black women slaves, it would leave the image of the man broken in her mind, so much so that she would raise her offspring in reverse roles. She would raise her sons to be women and her women to be men. And her girls, she would raise her sons to be women and her daughters to be men. And this would make her the greatest guard dog of the slave master, because that young man who would naturally rise up and have a problem with authority that wasn't righteous, that wasn't close enough to a submission of God, because that's the only real authority that man can accept with any real genuine spirit. Any other authority man is naturally going to reject, is naturally going to rebel against. Even God's authority man have rebelled against. But Christ showed that it can be done. Christ led the way for it to be done. But anything outside of that, man is going to rebel. And so that young rebellious man that woman raised up in a reverse role knows that she, and by way of the establishment, will never have to fear revolt. A cuck society. I don't know if you get it. When I say cuck society, people think that I'm just being silly or off the cuff. No, this stuff has deep, profound philosophical significance. We are living in a cuck society where men have been neutered through women at the behest of a corrupt establishment, a corrupt status quo. This is the reality. So of course they want to make Donald Trump seem like he's a little too brash. He's a little too honest. That's what they really should just come out and say. This fucking guy's a little too honest. We don't like how honest he is. Because that's what they're really showing us. They don't like how honest he is. That's all that we're seeing. They can't trust him. I don't care if they knew him before, if he was in the crowd before, I don't know what, I can't speak to what every man has done in every moment of his life. All I can tell you is I can look at the results and I can damn well infer a lot of the motive. They do not trust that man. They, whoever them are, do not trust Donald Trump, or else they would not spend so much time and energy and resources to take him out. And when they take him out, they would not, the taking him out in such a public way isn't intended for him. They're not choosing to go after him in a public way, in a public square, to torture and to torture him. It doesn't work like that. When does it work like that throughout history? Everybody knows. If you go up against the constabulary, if you go up against the king, if you go up against the establishment or the emperor, whoever it is, if you make it too inconvenient, they'll kill you with the snap of their fingers just to have a more quiet day. When you go up against the rich and powerful, they'll kill you with the snap of their fingers just so they don't have to deal with the inconvenience anymore. And if you think they couldn't do that to Donald Trump, you're lying to yourself again, because they could. They blew John F. Kennedy's head off. They could do Donald Trump the same way. And we'd all like to think there'd be an uprising if they did. But the proof is kind of in the pudding, isn't it? Not really. Not so much. Sad to say, not so much. So this witch hunt against Donald Trump ain't to torture him, it's to send a message to you. It's to send a message to you. Look what we can do to you. Look how we can other you. Look how we can craft a narrative about you. Look how we can wage the gravity and the weight of the legal system or America's government against you. Look what we're capable of. That's the message they intend to send.